Hey, it's Alex here from Cerbos, and today I'm going to run you through a bit of an update we've done inside of the Cerbos Playground, inside of Cerbos Hub, that makes it easier to set up your policy engine to behave in the way that your actual deployment can be set up and configured. And we've done this through the new settings section of this right-hand sidebar. So what these settings do is expose the configuration of the policy decision point that's running behind the Cerbos Hub Playground. That way you can basically configure the playground to respond in the same way that you may configure a PDP in a sidecar or a service inside of your own environment. So there's three settings we expose. First one is around default policy version, lenient scopes, and global variables. So we're going to run through each of these and show them how they all work. So in my policies, I have created some test data. So I have some resources of kind document, and I've created 4 different fixtures. I've created, first off, a document resource, which hasn't got any version defined. And if we go to our Explore tab, look at that user, and look at that new version, this action is actually denied. And why is that? So if we actually go and look at our resource policy for document, we've created this with a version of version 1. So what's happening when a request comes into Cerbos, if there isn't a policy version defined inside of the request, then it uses the default version as set inside the engine. So by default, the default policy version is default, but we can configure this to be that V1 version. And if we go back, that action is now enabled. So in this case of the resource being sent through with no policy version, that request has now fallen back to the default policy version, which we've just changed from default to V1, thus it's been evaluated. If I go and look at my V1 version, where I do specify the version in the policy, that also still works. So that's our first setting, change the default policy version. Next up is lenient scope search. So lenient scopes come into play when you're using scoped policies inside of your environment. So in this case, we have our default document definition. Then we can go and look at a tenant version where we have some, we've created a scope called tenant A, and we've actually changed some of the logic a bit to allow the action if the user is just a user. And if we go and look at a user that belongs to that particular tenant, that request is allowed. Where lenient scope comes in is when you want to make a request to a leaf node of your hierarchy. So if we go and look at this version, our scope now is tenant A.group1. We don't have a matching policy for the document resource that targets this particular tenant hierarchy, so the action is denied. If we go and enable lenient scope search, that action is now allowed. So what lenient scope search allows you to do is set the engine to work in such a way where if the leaf node of your hierarchy of scopes is not hasn't been defined, it will go up and work at the parent node, parent leaf of the tree. So here we haven't got a group 1 under a tenant A scope defined. So with lenient scope enabled, we're now using the tenant A scope, thus this action is allowed. And so we've enabled that lenient search capability up the tree. And finally is global variables. So as part of your deployment of a policy decision point in your environment, you can pass through environment variables to that instance. And those can be set either as environment variables or configuration in the server configuration itself. And with this field, we can actually go and emulate those global variables. So if we go look at our document 1 policy again, switch over to our document 1, we have this deny all rule that says if our global variable env is not equal to production, then it should be denied. So we can actually go and change our variable, say to staging, come back, the action is denied. So we're actually changing a global variable which has been set in your engine configuration or your server configuration when you deploy the PDP. The playground now gives you the ability to basically set up the PDP that's running behind the playground here to emulate your actual deployment, where you can change the default policy version, you can enable lenient scope search, and you can also go and set up a global variable. Really looking forward to hearing how you use this and how you update your playgrounds to emulate more closely your environment. We'll be hanging out in the Slack channel. You can also find us on GitHub, github.com/Cerbos, and look forward to speaking soon.